Hi there. It's almost Halloween, and welcome to Salt of the Earth. I'm here with Tim, or Timothy, or how do you like to be called?
Tim or Timothy. It's the same name. Yeah. It's good to
What
meet you.
does Tim mean?
Timothy means honoring God, and I think I changed the name back to the long version of it from Tim because I shortened it when I decided I wanted to be a hard-ass man and be cool like my dad and my friends' dads who had shortened names and all that. So I simply changed it back to Timothy out of respect of my own inner child and my own nature, simply for that reason. Yeah, but other than that, I go by either Tim or Timothy. It's fine.
Love it. So you have an astrological report you do weekly called Rasalila Healing. Is that going to be continuing? Is that name?
You know, it's interesting that you bring that up because actually I've considered the name a lot. And I think I do want to keep the name. The name I'm going to talk more about in hopefully future videos too. But it's a reference to, I mean, it is really a religious story, but I don't want it to be a religious story. I simply want it to be known as the divine dance. And that's really what the Rasalila dance really is. So my understanding of life in the universe is that everything is in fact divine dance. We're all dancing with each other, we're dancing with God, and that's why I've chosen the name Rasalila Healing. And, you know, even Rasalila Healing isn't really limited to just astrology. My partner Mackenzie was also doing Reiki healing services through Rasalila Healing. So I sort of saw that name referring to the divine dance as being a universal concept that can really be integrated into any modality of healing.
Mm-hmm. I love it. This morning when I started to do the recording, I noticed that there was a Saraswati flag hanging over me, and yesterday one of the offerings we made to the volcano was a Saraswati statue, so it's interesting the way that you described it. I've been referring to the Divine Comedy a lot too.
Yeah, divine music. Yeah, that's awesome.
So, what do you want to tell me in your words what you do? Because I've been following astrology for the last 10 years in a way just to make sense of all the crap that was going on, and I just needed some kind of reflection to give me an understanding of, you know, not just making myself wrong about everything. And so it really did give me a container, a structure, to have some sanity and clarity. And so I've enjoyed over the past few years getting to know Tom Kaipacha Lesher, Paleo Report, and since I've been living in a very isolated way here, it's been like my cooking and doing dishes time is listening to awesome astrology reports, and so that's how I discovered you. And I mean, you're really out of the box in a sense. It's almost like he's so, you know, once he ignites something in you, like I call him my court jester, you know, he's always bringing the truth in just the right way, and it's just so personal, right in my living room, and he's really onto something in the way that he's igniting hearts that way. And so when I found you, there seems to be even, you know, an inspiration, like I used to call you Mini Kaipacha.
I get that a lot, yeah.
But you know, you're really putting your heart on your sleeve. So, what would you call yourself? And what inspired you to actually take that action to do your own report?
Well, it's funny you say that because Kaipacha was. I really owe everything to him because not only did he teach me through the technical basics, I took his classes and, you know, just an online class, but he really did initiate me into my own chart. And that was the first real astrology reading that I got that totally verified and initiated my soul. And it was his astrology reading that encouraged me. I mean, basically he just said to start putting yourself out there. And so that's what I started to do. And I did not expect it to go anywhere. I started doing the astrology videos just as a practice, like a personal practice. And I had this brand new YouTube channel. I figured that there would be, you know, a couple hundred views every week kind of thing, but it would be a personal practice. And so I never expected that there would be a following of people that would discover me. Like, I never realized YouTube could be such a platform for doing that. And so I really owe a lot to K-Pacha and extremely grateful for him, because like you said, what he really is doing is igniting souls. That's what he is doing. And I am a result of that. And I feel the type of astrology that he is putting out there and is teaching is a realer type of astrology that is missing from this world, that really goes beyond the technical and starts getting into the personal. And I think that's why he had to be my teacher, and I was so inspired by him, because I really do see my own process. I mean, the way I really do astrology is through my own experiences and my own feelings. And it was through having a teacher like him that was so open personally that I was capable of seeing that that's possible, and then really giving myself to it and putting myself out there. And I kind of feel like that is my own contribution, is sort of laying myself out there naked as a means of sort of giving myself as an example to other people, almost giving people permission to be human, and similar things such as that. To not be afraid to open up to some of the more intimate and shadowy aspects of the human experience. Really seems to be where a lot of the healing is needed, yeah.
Right. I feel like a lot of the experiences in this day and age is so about the macro micro, you know, as within, so without, and etc. So you revealing about, you know, speaking about Virgo and, you know, what that represents is the divine feminine and the medicine woman and all of that, and the way that you shared about it, I mean, it spoke to so many women, and especially Virgos too, but women in general, and the way that you got to that and illuminate that. And then later you reveal, oh, I was just talking about my own experience with my girlfriend.
Yeah.
That's the truth. Like, if we can give a voice to what we're experiencing and how we're discovering it, and then we just try to share it, and then it just lights everyone up, because it's not that personal. Like, it's personal, but you even giving it a different description or just sharing your evolution of being exposed to it, everyone's resonating, you know? And so that is, again, the macro micro, that it's never wasted to share what we're discovering, because chances are others are going to discover or are having the same discoveries but don't know quite how to express it, you know? Like, can I call it this medicine woman? You know, like you're like a permission giver. I think that's why you really resonate for me. And I'm so grateful you said yes to doing the interview, because for me, for 2 years I had total isolation here, you know, play with, go to the beach with, go to yoga class with. And I started meeting a lot of artists and hanging out with artists and getting to do art, something I'd never done before. And so I had this idea that they're just such salt of the earth, and I really felt at home and comfortable in my own skin being with them. So I started getting this idea to interview them. So after those interviews and then listening to you, I'm like, well, this is my tribe too. Well, I could ask him. So it was like not just here, but, you know, from the personal then to the macro, and how fluid that is, you know, when we get the idea and then, is this possible? And yesterday, I have a friend here, we walked to the volcano and to this crater to make some offerings and prayers. And I kept feeling like, you know, I just want to be a facilitator to blow people's minds. I just want to witness and be part that my mind is blown, and that permission giver just to watch people being blown. And then I could feel the fear underneath that of like, well, that's dangerous. What if something bad happened? What if blowing their mind is a negative thing? And I could feel that I had reservation and fear about it. And then I realized, well, when their mind is blown, only their heart remains. And when I realized that, yeah, it's just being that heart opener. So I'm loving that we're totally speaking the same language. And then I came home, and your report this week is totally about finding that safety in yourself. You know, there's nothing with every step of the way, and there is nothing more literal than walking on hot, steaming ground. So it's just so poetic, this reality. So what would you want the world to know right now?
Well, I think that everything you just said really hit the nail on the head with some very important points. Because what I want the world to know is about the world. What I would love people to know is about themselves. The real purpose of an astrology reading is self-initiation, which means you don't need anybody else's permission to be what you naturally are. And unfortunately, we come at a time and an age where outside of astrology, which is a really lost and not popular science, art, whatever, it's not accepted that that's true. It's not accepted that by following your own nature, you are guaranteed success and safety. In fact, we are very heavily conditioned by the world to think otherwise. We are conditioned to think that if I do not fit this mold, if I do not become this person, if I do not meet this expectation or obligation, then I won't be successful. And what astrology really reveals is that you can't go against the grain of your own nature and expect success. And that's what the majority of people in this world are unfortunately doing, being so disconnected from our own nature. And not only as individuals, but as a collective, we are extremely disconnected from our own nature. We're disconnected from our own greater history. We don't inherently remember who we are. And so the most important part of this time is, like you said, there is this fear. There is this hesitancy. And we are pushing through this fear and hesitancy because we are having to decondition all of the past notions coming from our parents, our teachers, our religions, our cultures, telling us that you cannot be your own nature. When we start listening to our own unique hearts and our own unique voice, our own wisdom, that might not be the same heart, the same voice, the same wisdom that is being out there in the world, we find our inner gifts that we have to share with other people. And then once we start sharing our unique gifts and our unique nature, lo and behold, the whole rest of the world says, wow, that's amazing. There is this unique nature that was missing, that was incomplete, but now it has returned to its nature. So this is what I feel the most important thing the whole world can be doing right now, is we're simply reconnecting with our own nature, without the need for all the technical words and the spiritual terms. I mean, it really is just about figuring out who we are, our outstanding history, and owning up to that. I mean, the future comes directly out of our past. Once we get a greater sense of who we are, we actually understand our past, then we get an understanding of who we are and where we're going.
So what do you feel like are some steps people can take to honor their unique nature, or even get to start examining themselves a little more? And the theme of authenticity, I mean, you referred to that a lot. I mean, there are a lot of people who have studied personal growth and different things for 20 years, and they're still struggling with the same things. What do you feel like are some examples or steps people could take to step more into their authenticity?
It's a really good question. Authenticity, first of all, requires total honesty. And it requires honesty on every level. Obviously, if we want total authenticity, we want authenticity on every level. So we want honesty on every level. And in order to be honest on every level, we have to be listening on every level. We have to be tuned into every level. So one of the most best ways for us to tune into our own nature that culture doesn't teach us to tune into is our feelings. our actual emotional sensations, our feelings. It's very interesting because there are a lot of people that seek out astrologers, and the question is, what is my past lives? And I personally don't think that the best way to learn about your past lives is through an astrology reading. Because you'll get the conceptual framework, you'll get, the basic understanding. But what really tells you about the deeper who you are is your feelings. You start learning about your past lives through your emotional reactions. We have emotional reactions to things that don't rationally make sense an awful lot of the time. But because we do not allow ourselves to tune into and be honest with these so-called irrational feelings, we actually disconnect from what information is being told through these feelings. So when we, movies, we're all addicted to movies because we have such emotional attraction to there, and we get such emotional reactions. Why is that? We all have different favorite movies. We all have different emotional reactions. Why is that? By tuning into these different parts of ourself, our own story starts to get told to us. Why does this feeling hurt? Why does this sensation hurt? Why do I have these phobias? Why do I have these sexual fetishes? We have to start being honest on all levels of our being. Even the really weird, fringy, so-called mundane, we have to start letting ourselves surrender into the total what it means to be a human being. And this takes a level of surrender, because you have to go places that other people are unwilling to go. Because a lot of this stuff has not yet been sensed. And that's where we see a lot of the healers of today, is having to take this plunge into the unknown for everybody, for the collective, to explore the unknown and then come back and report. Oh, well, if you start tuning into your feelings, if you start feeling out this really fringy stuff, it's not bad, it's not scary anymore. It's actually telling you a greater story about yourself, one that might lead us into some complicated, deeper areas, which is why there's very few people willing to go there. Because this is also fundamentally us taking back our power. And people are afraid of that responsibility.
Yeah. Well, isn't that a contrast? Surrender and taking back your power, right?
Yep. Yep, that's the spiritual oxymoron.
Yeah, and when you were just speaking of surrender too, I totally got that whiff of we talk about surrender, we have it like as an inspiration, or what do you say, value that we want to value, but yet we don't actually know what it is until that moment when we truly have to surrender. Mm-hmm. And
so a lot of people can phrase that one being, are you afraid of death? And then to that answer, a lot of people, including myself, would like to believe, no, I'm not afraid of death, because of whatever explanation or whatever belief system or whatever sensation within me. But when it comes to death, you're actually face to face with the unknown. You're about to lose everything you've ever had, including the fundamental basis of how we discern reality. The fundamental laws that hold together the fabric of space and time. When we face death and the unknown, that is real surrendering. And so a lot of times when we're asked if we're afraid of death, I would like to say that I am not, but I certainly am. And when we go through these periods where we have everything stripped away from us, this is called death and rebirth. And when you study astrology, it becomes, from an objective point of view, pretty easy to say, oh yeah, when you go through a death, that's a period of intense chaos and transformation, and then something new comes out of it. Something better or newer or more evolved or on a higher level. And yet, when you are in that facing death, facing insecurity, facing chaos, facing the unknown, there's basically nothing we can do except to surrender to that experience. And I think on a certain level, we all feel a certain amount of fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one artist I really love, her name is Sofia, and she's always painting the Madonna and the Divine Feminine, but she's always also, this is what I'm going through, let's paint about it now. And we'll teach a whole guided class on shamanically working through that. And it's so funny because I wanted to ask her if I could interview her, and that day she posted an email that said, my interview. And she said, my interview with the unknown. And basically she's like, I'm molting right now. I'm molting. I don't know. I'm leaving an archetype. I do not know what archetype is going to be born out of this time. Mm-hmm. So I just, you hear another word and it gives it another different flavor again of just this unknown territory that we're all in and discovering ourselves. But what you just said about the chaos and death and rebirth brought me to that question about why, I don't even remember what it is, why do you think that scientists or astronomers and people who really are face to face with the cosmos, and why can they not accept astrology as a science? When, history repeats itself. You see it in astrology, right? So many things. You can't deny that the moon has an impact on very logistical things. So, when I asked a local astronomer here who helped build never mind, I don't even remember what he built, but he was like, why should I think that Jupiter going by us should have any more of an effect on me than a brick flying through the air? And I was stunned.
Yeah, it's stunning, isn't it? And I think that the answer to that question is the same answer you would get for the question, why are scientists trying to build a base on Mars? And the answer is because although scientists can be extremely brilliant and so many light years ahead of where we are now in terms of some types of thinking, many, many scientists are severely disconnected from nature. And so they're trying to build a base on Mars is just the most exemplary of the fact of how disconnected we are from nature. If we seriously think we're going to use our technology to be able to better survive on Mars, this desolate, rocky, toxic planet, we're already giving up on our planet and we're already figuring out how we're going to live on that one, shows how these really brilliant, technologically advanced minds can be so just severely disconnected from nature to the point of just lacking common sense. And I think it really does come down to that when scientists refuse to look at astrology the same way a child refuses to try new food. I watched, what's his name, Mr. Cosmos, I try not to make him a scapegoat, but this guy, famous scientist, I listened to this whole rant that he went on about how astrology is just such BS, and within his own rant, many times over exposed the fact that he has never taken the time to look into astrology. And I can't think of anything more unscientific to try and reach conclusions on a science you've never looked into. And that's where the majority of scientists that slander astrology is. And I don't blame them because of the amount of shitty astrologers and stuff that's not really helping us to make things better. But at the same time, there's this big gap that should not be there. And it won't be there in the future, I don't think, as we continue to observe and see.
Yeah, it is hysterical what you said, that it's so unscientific to not even be willing to look into it. So, speaking of Mars and where people's energies and focus and resources are going, if you had all the money in the world, what would you be doing?
That's another good question, and I think it leads back into, what could I do for the world, if anything? Because money is power, money is energy. And I think the most important thing this world needs is education. We need to be educated on who we are. We need to be educated on our factual collective history, not a severely distorted one. And if we could know who we are, if we could know our connection to the earth, if we could know our collective history, and therefore know what we used to be, then this world would change very quickly. We still have religious wars taking place. We still have, I mean, talking about money, all of our collective money is going into wars that are more or less based off of conceptual differences. And these conceptual differences would not exist if we actually knew our nature. Most of these conceptual differences have to do with nation versus nation, race versus race, religion versus religion, still. And it's just this showing us that we really have not evolved beyond this very primal, just basically brother against brother, sister against sister. And that comes out of a lack of education. This world doesn't know that it's sister against sister, brother against brother. This world is convinced that it's us versus the enemy. And that comes out of a severe miseducation. That's not the truth. But everybody, every nation, every religion has their set of reasons as to why it is that way. And we're fighting to survive, and everybody else is the enemy, and everybody else is the competition. And that is the fundamental patriarchal illness that has infected this entire planet, is that we no longer see each other as family. We see each other as threat and as competition. Mm-hmm. And that is coming out of a severe lack of feminine understanding. Whereas if we were reconnected to the earth, if we were reconnected to our own feminine nature, it's much harder to oppress people that you see as your own children or as your own family. And I think that's, we can start teaching this to people. We can start proving this to people. And astrology is one of these areas where you can prove it, that we are all connected. And then it's not conceptual. It's not about what you believe anymore. It's about seeing the evidence and knowing it.
Right. Yeah, what you said reminds me also of the macro and micro of just self-talk. The way that we talk to ourselves, and Matt Kahn talks about this too, is, would you tell a child, oh, you idiot, you're such an idiot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You deserve to be punished. And that it starts right there, how we are treating ourselves. And it seems like no matter how much one talks about self-love, it's still such unknown territory and the hardest ship to navigate. And that self-love really is the new enlightenment.
Yeah.
Is the path to enlightenment. Maybe you speak about this already too.
I'm really glad that you brought up Matt Kahn, because really what I see Matt Kahn doing is he is deconditioning the entire collective. He is deconditioning patriarchal concepts that have infected the entire collective. So instead of getting in front of a group of people and in preaching, this is what you have to be, this is what you need to do, he's getting in front of a group of people and giving people the tools to deconstruct everything that gets in our way. Everything that prevents us from seeing our own nature and our own innocence. And actually seeing one another as the child, which of course we have to start seeing ourselves as a child before we can start seeing the rest of the world as what it factually is, which is, in many cases, lost children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, talk about education right there. He's doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing it. So what really lights you up?
It's probably the synthesis of all of this. I guess it's a combination of love, of what I know in my heart is the eternal reality, we could sort of say. What in my heart I see when I look into another human being, when you get rid of all the bullshit, when you get rid of all the covers, all the roles, when you actually see into somebody's nature, that's what I love, and that fuels me. And what comes out of that seems to be the gifts I want to give to people. Is simply what I want to give to people is who they are. It's like if we could simply see who we are by removing all the bullshit, we would easily fall in love with ourselves. So that really inspires me. And then the other half to that, of course, is the passion. When I look out into the world and I see the lack of it. I look out into the world and I see the amount of suffering, of disillusionment, of pains, of old cycles that keep repeating and repeating and repeating. And it's so painful. And so I think both of these things really motivate me and us. And I think when it comes to the healers of this world, this is kind of where we're constantly sitting, is in this beauty of what is, but is kind of hidden from the sights of the world, and then this world that is suffering so much, resulting from a lack of seeing its own inherent beauty, and then being bewildered, and then getting lost, and then accidentally people just hurting themselves and making it worse than it has to be, and creating all of these hells and all of these demons and all these fears and paranoias, that it just doesn't have to be so scary and dark. And when we tap into the nature that's underneath that, this is really what motivates me, is this understanding that all of these treacherous, horrible things can be happening and dancing in front of our eyes. And yet all of this simultaneously is coming out of this eternal love and nature. And that is really mind-blowing and really inconceivable. And that really takes us into this powerful opportunity for us to awaken now on this planet. And I think that is the real opportunity here. And I think that's what I'm feeding off of, is the extreme polarity between where we find the world now and the eternal reality of what is. And that polarity just forces our heart to shatter and be ripped open, and for us to be awake and for us to be active and involved in this world as healers. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of an automatic, effortless process. You just start waking up and your heart gets ripped open. Yeah.
What do you give, what kind of advice do you give to people who are really dealing with grief? You know, the last 2 months, I'm sure you know this astrologically, a lot of people faced a lot of release and involuntary surrender. You know, personally, I saw all of the fires in Northern California where I had a history and belongings and had to release a lot of things, but many people had a lot more loss to deal with, you know, including some of my clients that just cannot get over the injustice and the unfairness of one thing after another, after another, after another, after another. Like, at what point, if your heart is so broken, how can you open your heart and mind to, you know, mend it? When nothing on the outside is reflecting any hope or positivity.
Yeah.
How do you, what kind of advice do you give people?
That is a very, very important question, because it's one that I think that many of us in the spiritual communities and the New Age communities, we're still learning how to answer this question, because a lot of people don't know how to handle it. Particularly if someone else is in grief. How do we handle somebody else? Because I think whether you are going through a great amount of grief yourself or somebody else is, the most important thing is to give permission for their strife and their grief. Like, it is freaking okay to feel like the entire existence is a cosmic curse. It is okay to feel like you are damned by God. It is okay to feel bitterness and resentment towards God, towards life, towards these things, because this is, again, removing shit out of the way that gets in our way. Is a lot of very compassionate spiritual people have these notions that we're not allowed to feel these negative feelings. And we're not spiritual if we feel angry at God. We're not spiritual if we feel that level of hell, I'm going to say. And I totally see many very spiritual people see that level of hell and go through that experience. And the only way you can describe it is like being a worm that's being like run over on the pavement. I mean, we can go through very tangible experiences of having nothing. And there is no God. And there is no purpose, and there is no love, and everything is shit. And so usually when we go through some traumatic experience, that tends to be the first downswing, is we really hit rock bottom. And we have to be okay with hitting rock bottom first. We have to be okay with our life crumbling to pieces, our dreams being taken from us, and all of these things. And so the most important thing is we need to have communities of people who can support other people going through that. and not be just like, oh yeah, but when you're feeling better, you won't be saying that, blah, blah. Not the things we should be saying to someone who's going through a trauma. It's like we need to empathize with that level of trauma. And when we're going through that level of trauma, we have to be okay with being the worm getting run over. It really is a part of the process. And I'm really tired of seeing people belittle it by saying, oh, there's some way to get around that. There's some way to escape the pain of life. There's some way not to go through a heartbreaking traumatic experience. As if the heartbreaking traumatic experience isn't the medicine itself, when it is the medicine. Our pain correlates to the amount of ecstasy that's being ripped open in us. If we don't allow ourselves to reach that level of hell, if we don't allow ourselves to be ripped open to that level, and there's so many ways we can prevent that. We can go out and drink, we can join some club and escape it. Conceptually, this is what always happens. And we almost have to take it on to another level and be okay with the fact that if we go through some traumatic experience, we almost have to be okay with the fact that we are going to put band-aids on. We're going to cover it up and sweep it under the rug. But then we have to bring it back out later. We have to be okay with the actual experience of the heartbreaking trauma that does happen on this planet. And I think that's one of the most important spiritual areas that we need to work on as a collective, because it's almost like a lot of the new aginess almost unverifies that experience, says, well, if you follow this routine, if you go through this pattern, then you're going to be happy all the time. And I see that as dispersing a miseducation that can really end up hurting people. So when we're going through trauma, to answer your question, you just got to get ripped apart. That really is the part of the process.
And if you see a friend going through it, what is the best way to handle it? How to say it? Empathizing, I find, you did mention empathy, not trying to change them, just to hold them in that space of feeling it.
Yeah. So holding space is feeling what the other person is feeling. And when we allow ourselves to do that, this is about not having anything to say. When someone is going through that level of trauma, there is nothing we can say. We simply have to hold space for them, which means that we are letting them know that we are there for them, we love them, we're going to do absolutely everything we can for them, and yet we know that we can't undo the trauma. And so the best thing that we can do is simply sit there with them in that space, which means that we have to let our feelings merge with theirs, and then we sit in hell with them. And this is something that a lot of people don't like doing either. And that, I believe, is what separates the sheep from the goats in the spiritual movements. Those that are willing to go to hell, who are willing to sit on that level with those who are suffering there, are the true healers. When we sit on that level with others, we're actually, on the flip side, if we're in that level of hell and someone comes and doesn't say anything and just sits there with us, we will feel this spaciousness. We will be able to breathe deeper. We will be able to relax more. That's what we give to people when we meet them there, through feelings. And it does happen completely through feelings, not what we're saying or doing. And typically whenever somebody dies, it's always a routine. I'm sorry for your death, blah, blah, blah. And it's just, people have this stuff memorized. There's no meeting people on that level. It's just saying the words.
Yeah, and usually why those people in the most grief feel the most lonely and isolated is because most of the people around them are not emotionally mature, and that's because your grief is triggering their grief, their unresolved grief, and they don't want to feel it, and that's when you find no one showing up for you.
That's right, and that's because the majority of people are unwilling to descend into their own uncomfortable feelings. So how are you going to be able to do that for another person? And this is why, this is again going back to what's the most important thing we need to do. We need to tap into our feelings. We need to open up into these deeper parts of who we are. We've all gone through trauma. I mean, this is coming from my own teacher, Jeffrey Wolf Green. All souls are wounded in this day and age. We all have our trauma. We all have to feel our own feelings and hold space for one another. And I see this as being where the future healing and the future healing communities are going to take things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really appreciated that you did that extra video between your weekly shows of P.S. Just so you know, this is where I'm at right now.
I'm hoping to do a lot more of that too, yeah.
And, I think people really appreciate that level of authenticity, and I think I was, and a few of your viewers were surprised about you talking about how isolated or lonely you were, or I don't know the words right now, but I really can relate to that, as a loyal Leo who's always had plenty of girlfriends, plenty of very strong friendships, always easy to build community, and I've had the exact opposite here. And it really, that blows your mind in a very uncomfortable way.
Particularly when you're a real Leo.
about how that showed up for you, how you dealt with it, and probably some silver linings in it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for once again reaffirming that. And in fact, so many people reaffirmed that, I put out a video, just let the cat out of the bag with my personal life, and I could not believe how much positive reaffirmation, people saying, oh my gosh, I can relate to you, and nobody talks about this stuff, just because I'm just speaking about my own life. It's just, it's crazy to me. So it's just like, this is how healing is happening, is you just start talking about yourself. And I think this is what many astrologers could still do, is, we kind of got to detach from the technical processes a little bit and start feeding off of our own expertise and experiences in these types of things. Now, going back to the question about isolation, that's something I've always dealt with in life, and it's played out in different ways. I didn't really have good friends until the end of high school, and then I lost the majority of those friends pretty quickly after that when I went through my spiritual awakening. So isolation, being super Leo, I think that is partly a Leonian quality, first of all, as Leo is like the top of the pyramid, the king, and so we feel responsible for everybody else, but there's also this level of being separate from everybody else. And so I feel like I've kind of always felt like that, like I have this creativity and this voice that I want to contribute this. And this is, of course, the Leo, and Leo represents the individual voice in us all. So this is what we're trying to contribute, and the problem has always been, how do I contribute this voice? And lo and behold, many, many spiritually attuned people go through these isolating experiences because of where culture is today. There's no place for this sensitive, really what it is, person. I think the sensitive people are the ones that really get isolated the most, because the entire culture is collectively tuning out their sensitivities. And so we can't join the club. And so that's how I've experienced a lot of my isolation, is at first it was being berated for being too feminine, because you're too emotional, you're too sensual, blah, 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 you need to toughen up, be a man. And so I sort of rejected my own nature, trying to fit in by being a man and being tough. And then I later went through another period of isolation, rejecting that false masculinity that I embodied, going back into a spiritual awakening, and then suddenly you don't have anything in common with any of your old friends. And so partly the isolating experience is also us evolving. As we evolve and our values change, suddenly we find ourselves being separated from all the old things that used to represent us. Our old friends, our old clubs, etc. And so many of us that are spiritually seeking and evolving do redundantly go through these periods of isolation. And I think that is ultimately sort of forcing us to come back in and find our own inner voice, and then contribute this isolated voice back to the collective once we know what this unique voice is, once it's separated itself enough to find itself. And so that's kind of a universal process, I think, as well.
And so was that your experience? I mean, how hard was it for you?
Well, yeah, going back to that experience is...
Make it personal.
Yeah, that's great, because this is changing now. I am still isolated, but now I'm talking to you, and this is new. My spiritual awakening was 2008, and then I went through this period of hardcore religiosity because I had these experiences that were so profound and so tangible. Basically what they did is reteach me my own past lives where I had been really submerging into spirituality, and it's always been about finding the answers and knowing the truth. And so I got back into that, and I found the answers. I knew the truth, and I wanted to distribute it. And so I was, when people go through their spiritual awakening, I think it's pretty typical that, you just want to scream it on top of a mountain and show it off and share it with the entire world, and as a result you turn off everybody because you're this loud, screaming, obnoxious person in the room. And so I went through that phase pretty hard, and then I moved down here to Savannah, and since I moved to Savannah, I've had very little contact with anybody. I moved down here to go to school for animation, didn't end up doing that at all. I met my partner Mackenzie, and me and Mackenzie have, for the most part, been doing this hardcore spiritual training the last 4 years, and we've been pretty much the only people in our lives, and it has not been easy at all. And I've been really isolated through that process. And now that I'm doing these videos and opening up, it's like I'm sharing what I've learned through this process with other people, and this is now helping me to move through my isolation. So it is, again, reflecting that process where I had to separate from everybody else to find my own voice. And then I've been years digging into my own voice, and it takes time. We have to dig up, particularly for me, I've had to dig up lifetimes of all the other monks telling me what to do, lifetimes, our parents telling us what to do, all this deep conditioning. So once again, getting stuff out of the way, finding our own nature, and then after that, now it seems like I'm starting to reconnect, but I'm still very isolated coming out of that recent phase. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, but I feel like it's the same thing a little bit as the grief that you were describing, that we feel like that worm that got run over in that isolation. Like, why doesn't anyone want to play? Why doesn't anyone get me?
Yeah.
Why doesn't anyone want to engage on this level? There's, for me, a lot of victimhood.
Yeah. So I guess let me then reflect back to you my own unfolding and storytelling, which is that I went through quite a few years of that, and this is all changing this year for me. I've really felt that. And this year, this is changing for me because it's like now all these people, it's like Kaipacha, and all these people are being just like, oh no, you need to speak up. And so it's like this phase of going through the isolation, and now you're suddenly disconnected from all your friends, you're disconnected from everything you had. It's like the in-between until you start reconnecting with your soul tribe, who's actually going to meet you on the level that you've been transitioning into. And that's why we go through these periods of isolation, is it's like you've been transitioning, your own values might have been transitioning, and so it requires people that are actually going to meet us on this level. And this, I think, is one of the most painful parts, is a whole hell of a lot of the people that we may love may not always meet us on our level. And so there is that feeling of isolation and separation that is there. And we have to be patient until we find people that are on our level. And that's the process that we're collectively going through right now, that's called the entrance into the age of Aquarius.
This totally brings up, again, the paradox and the contrast of life, where everyone's speaking about community and finding your tribe.
Yes.
And heart just has so much thirst for that, and life is just not bringing it to you.
Yes. Very, very good point. And this is the point. Because everybody wants...
talking about it. It's so intangible.
Yeah, everybody wants to skip into the age of Aquarius.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to shortcut there. Oh, we're going to set up the ideal community, and we're all going to be in the know. We're all going to connect through the internet and do all these things. And yes, this is a part of the age of Aquarius, but we're not moving into the age of Aquarius till we culminate and complete the age of Pisces. And that's the shit that nobody's looking at, because that's the shit of we have to surrender to this world. And we have a very famous spiritual idol who went by Jesus, who depicted the age of Pisces to us and then said, if you want to be like me, pick up your cross and follow me. And that's the part that many of us are struggling to do, that is the prerequisite to moving into the age of Aquarius. Is we have to understand that picking up our cross is the understanding that we've already been wounded. That's the awakening. We've already been wounded, we've already been scarred, this world's already fucked up. Now we have to see it for what it actually is. We have to be aware of our woundings that have already happened, and that's the part that a lot of people want to skip around because it's a little difficult to start. You know, it's like when you get food poisoning, the realizing that you have food poisoning is pretty much the least favorite part because you're realizing what is going to follow. Oh, I just have food poisoning. I'm going to be spending several hours purging over the toilet. That's the part of the process that we collectively are doing now that a lot of people don't want to do, is I don't want to even see that I'm poisoned, let alone release this stuff. Well, that's too bad because we're not going to feel healthy and light and pure till we remove the toxins. Mm-hmm. We're not going to be able to shortcut into a spiritual community when you didn't even acknowledge your own shadow. And this is what people do. And then everything falls to shit because the shadows come out and people still are afraid to identify with them. So all these really horrible things happen in the spiritual community and nobody can even admit it. Mm-hmm. And this is reflected in the churches, this is reflected in the temples where we have the priests and all the sexual stuff. Yeah, it's there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I've had a similar journey to you as far as, reaching out on the internet, and I decided to, anyway, I connected with my twin flame when I didn't even know that existed, and it's my whole life. I mean, it's the indescribable. And so I offered a program, a 1-month self-inquiry program, of making that a possibility in your life. And I started with women joining for like $11 a class, online. And now it's 2 years later, and I'm working with women in Australia, Japan, Canada, Scotland, England, France, and women are meeting their twin flames after. The formula is working, and it's just like, I'm not attached to it. I just know that they're getting a lot of value out of doing the inner work, so everything's going to change anyway. So women are reporting not having pain in their body anymore, things like that. So, it's in retrospect, I can see the choreography of the last 2 years. Like, I would never have gone online, but yet now the world's reflecting back that was called for. And you've mentioned twin flames, so I don't study twin flames. I don't really know about it. I'm just sharing from my personal experience. So what's important about an encounter with a twin flame, and why would someone want to invoke it?
Well, first of all, I have to admit my not being qualified to know, because I don't. And maybe I'll have to join your course because I have no idea. I only have my own experience like yours, and I only have what I assume is a twin flame relationship. The question was, how do you go towards that, or what even it is?
Well, I think you've used the words before, and that's why I even ventured to ask you twin flames. So, why would it be important to even want that?
Okay, yeah. Well, first of all,
having an encounter,
Yeah, it seems to me the prerequisite to having an encounter with a twin flame is absolute dedication to a basically spiritual mission. Having some type of deeper purpose that is ultimately going to be much deeper than the amount of money you make or your immediate family. It kind of gets into this more, I'm here to hopefully depart some kind of wisdom or share this. I mean, there has to be a large level of dedication and passion to a spiritual goal or ideal, I think, to even have a prerequisite to be in a twin flame relationship. So that would immediately disqualify all the people that are looking for relationships. Because someone who gets into a twin flame relationship, it's not a fun and games, ice cream cones and dates to the movies type of relationship at all. A twin flame relationship really does seem to be a lot of heavy and hard work. Like heavy duty, intense drilling into each other. That way we can move through a boatload of shit in a short amount of time. Seems to be twin flame. Now that's a very Scorpio dynamic, which is fast transformation in a short amount of time. So twin flames absolutely rely on the deeper reasons of why we are together in order to even survive. It has to be understood. Why is our relationship intense? Why is our relationship transformative? Oh, that's right, because we are both in this together for some deeper spiritual ideal. We are helping each other move through a lot of stuff in a short amount of time so we can come into our power and really start doing stuff. And so this is kind of the twin flame relationship. It's not a, we go out and do yoga in the park and hold hands, and it's, you know, I'm not saying that that level of love isn't there, because that level of love certainly is there. Yet it becomes really complicated really fast. It is an evolutionary vehicle. And I think that's the reason the majority of twin flame relationships don't survive. Because it's just so intense that after so long, people say, you know what, I don't want the spiritual mission anymore. I want a normal life. And so before anybody gets into a twin flame relationship, you have to be totally willing to not have a normal life and not do things normally. It's just not how it works. At least from my own experience.
Right now, are you actively in your relationship?
Yes, yeah. And it's still active. Very active. And we have been digging and digging and digging. And like you said, you know, a lot of the information that I did this video on Virgo, and all these people were just like, I've never heard this understanding on Virgo. This is all coming from her. And the amount of digging that we've done together. And it has not all been fun and games. So I'd be very happy to know that it pays off in some way, because it's been a lot of, it sort of seems like wounds rubbing against wounds and this type of stuff in order for us to learn about our wounds, in order for us to find our identity and detach from who we thought we were. We had to start rubbing up against each other, triggering our own wounds unintentionally, because we're both very, very sensitive people. So this is how it tends to happen.
Well, it is going to show up every different for everyone as far as the intensity or where the flavors are falling. But the only thing I can describe it as is that there is such a, in that union, it's such a profound safety that you can look at those wounds even.
That's profound, yeah.
And that for you, I mean, I've never experienced anger the way I've experienced anger now, and he gives me full permission. And he can hold it, and it has nothing. It's not personal to him, and they're not usually. It's not usually about him, but just that he gives me the space and safety to be a wild woman and throw things. And he's like, you know, he makes light of it, but at least it's safe for me to express. And I know that's just, it's going to be a phase, and he's giving me the space to have that fully expressed and addressed.
Yeah, that's great. You're holding space for each other's most ugly looking shadows coming out of that deep love, and that is profound.
Yeah, it is. It is. I would like to talk about that some more, you know, in the future, just so that people understand that it isn't bunnies and balloons and rainbows, you know, that it's the kind of love that will transform you to your highest bid.
Yeah.
Definitely brings up everything that's false, that you haven't even had the two legs to stand on to feel or face or confront. Yeah, on that note, I would like to ask you about the Divine Masculine Rising. I feel like the reason why we're living literally at the edge of the world. We can see the steam of the volcano from our driveway. I walk out on the black lava where there is no history, there was no tribal wars on that spot. So just really acknowledging that the space that I hold is channeling this new earth, and being able to embody myself more, I feel like I'm here to hold the space open for the divine masculine to rise. And you're talking a lot about this week even being a place of balance again. And I don't really know what my question is, but what I've been talking about with people lately is how we've probably gone through our lives being androgynous more because it's not safe to be a man or be a woman. And kind of going in that pendulum, and you've talked about this here today too, of having to explore your sides. What do you feel like that's looking like? Not even what you feel like, but what you feel like and what you're seeing in the stars today. What is that looking like, the divine masculine rising?
Wow. Yeah, I think that's the question of right now. I think the question is even, what is the divine masculine? And I think that that's what we're trying to collectively assemble right now. And I have been very called to focus on this starting now, really. I'm starting a local group here in Savannah, a gentleman's group. We're going to start in November. And I was already meeting with some of the people. Yeah, it's like no one does this. But the question is going to be, for the first day, what is the divine masculine? And we're going to have all the men come down, and we're going to write down on a sheet of paper, what does masculinity mean to us? Because I think we're going to quickly find that the reason this group is assembling is to figure out what exactly that is. And I can't tell you exactly what that is because it's become so distorted. But what I can tell you is that what masculinity is depicted as in this world is not real masculinity. And so another phrase that I think I'm going to bring into this group that I really dislike hearing is that it's a man's world. Because what I'm starting to understand is that it's actually not. It's a lost, distorted man's world. And so the question is, what is masculinity? And I think the answer is it looks a hell of a lot different from how we've been conditioned to believe it is. And this plays out on really vast, huge levels, even how we conceptually see God, as the collective concept of who God has been the man. And so who is God? Who is the man? These are, what is divine masculinity is these questions that we're asking. And with Pluto moving through Capricorn, what is changing and what is transforming and what is being revolutionized is tradition, is the past, the conceptual, the accepted ideas of what man is. And basically, there is this concept that masculinity is the authority, and that masculinity is therefore very hard and in control. And I think that those are actually distortions of what masculinity actually is. And so it's interesting that you bring up this androgynous nature, because I sort of feel that when we get in touch with divine masculinity, is that from our cultural standpoint, it's much more androgynous than what we've been conditioned to believe. Like, there are softer qualities to the man, and in fact, the hard qualities of man, which is really the protective, defensive qualities, which are there in masculinity. We're supposed to be the protective, but we're protecting the femininity. We're protecting the women and children, and so divine masculinity is also doing this in itself. It is powerful, in control. It's really the guiding force, like the elder man. But it is in service of masculinity's own softness and compassion, which is really about preserving the family, preserving goodness, preserving truth. And so what we see is that a lot of those protective qualities got very distorted to the point of being shut off from the softer ones, and then that's why it got lost.
Mm-hmm. That's really profound what you're sharing. I think it's a really amazing description about the protecting of the feminine within. And yeah, it reminds me of how I've always been drawn to like 1970s David Bowie is my ideal masculine, maybe because of like, well, he's a man and he gets to put on makeup and he gets to dress up and he gets to be creative, and yet he is so all man to me. And that's even the visual I had when you were describing it. It's like it's making sense to me why I'm drawn to that, because there's a safety in knowing the man is in touch with his feminine.
Yes.
And getting to playfully express it. So I'm wow, just
very
talking about
good. Wow.
That archetype.
Yeah, and you know, it's so critical what you just said, because you just said, oh, masculinity rekindling its relationship with real masculinity makes you feel safe. And so the ascension of the divine feminine and masculine is actually happening simultaneously, because the whole thing is that the divine feminine has not felt safe for a long, long time as a result of masculinity being perverted to the point of being disconnected from our own sensitivity. And then it's like we're delusional. How can you feel safe when there's a powerful man with a sword who's disconnected from his sensuality? And that's the world we've lived in for a long time. And so it's very interesting you brought up David Bowie, because I feel like my own personal David Bowie has been Krishna, who is this very feminine appearing man with long hair, and he wears makeup, and he gets to dance and be very sensual. And that, being exposed to a culture that had that, it's like you show Krishna to Americans and they think that he's a woman. So even to be exposed to a culture that understood that concept of man and God was thoroughly revolutionary to me, giving permission to what I feel is a better understanding of divine masculinity. And Krishna is still the defensive warrior who goes off on the battlefield and protects the women and the children and goodness. But he doesn't appear like the Marlboro Man.
Yeah. Funny that you said that my uncle was the one of the
You're kidding. No way. Oh boy. That's
a lot
awesome.
of weight to carry, right?
Yeah, look at that story.
So who are some of your greatest muses and mentors? One of them, of course, being Krishna.
Yeah. I mean, we've named Kaipacha. I think we've named Jeffrey Wolf Green and Kaipacha. I mean, another huge one has been Ram Dass. Ram Dass pretty much gave me permission to start exploring myself and to open the doors to all these other different forms of spirituality. And also Ram Dass teaches through giving himself as an example, and that tremendously inspired me as well. So Ram Dass is another huge one. Krishna Das is another one. I like to chant and sing. That's part of my own spiritual practice that really goes outside of astrology, and I think all astrologers and healers have to find our own spiritual practices that go outside of these areas. But it's really interesting because I have Pluto right now transiting my Neptune, so I've actually gone through this really profound spiritual transformation throughout this last year. And so a lot of my old role models are no longer role models. Yeah, and that's part of the isolating experience as well, is a lot of our role models end up being incomplete role models. And then, it's like when Kaipacha read our charts, he's just like, sometimes there's not a whole lot of teachers and not a whole lot of muses and mentors. And then you've kind of got to be your own muse and mentor. So it's like I'm kind of almost learning to do that right now, although I certainly have the list of people that I have to take my hat off to. Yeah.
Yeah, I love everything you're sharing. It's so resonant. I know we need to wrap some things up here. So one of my questions is about astrology and the mind and gullibility. And so, the danger is of if you're someone like me who only reads the predictions, who's not really going in depth and studying all the planets and learning how to read it for oneself, you do the evolutionary aspect, which to me implies that you are also saying there's always like a higher way, or, you know, there's a transcendence possibility. But when I read unfavorable things, it's kind of like, you know, someone just painted with shoe paint on my windshield and I can't unsee it. You know,
Yeah.
For instance, you know, I was having a really great day and hadn't read my Astro.com in like 6 months, and suddenly there's next year's report, and it pretty much says, you know, oh, you could go to jail. And a lot of other very unfavorable things after Jupiter has been like, you know, big in my chart in the last year and everything growing and abundant and blah, blah. So what do you say to people when, I mean, when I'm thinking of the future or thinking of doing things or starting new things, I've been going, and then I'm going to go to jail. Then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to go to jail.
Yeah.
Both parents went to jail in my life, so it's impacted me. There may be a secret fear. So I'm just using myself as the template. What do you say to people who read like their worst fears?
Well, it's first of all interesting that, you know, clearly that's having a reaction because it's hitting home. You said, oh, parents, you know, I don't want to go to jail. So, you know, even when I hear something like that, it's usually that the reading of the Astro.com is bringing up something else in you that you're moving through. But, you know, it's a really great point because astrology is so misinterpreted, and it's so easy to misinterpret because of how it's been used for so long, and it's sort of having that deterministic quality to it. So that deterministic quality really needs to be understood. And first of all, I always make it crystal clear in my readings, I cannot predict the future. I can't tell if you're going to jail next year. And I'm pretty sure that the majority of astrologers cannot predict the future either. There are, of course, always exceptions, and there are some really amazing stories that I've heard about. But all the astrologers that I really follow, we don't predict the future. So it's much more so an understanding that, like how we go through puberty, roughly around the same time of age, there are these rhythms, there are these cycles that we do naturally progress through. But it's not crystal clearly determined. Not everybody goes through puberty at the same time anyways. So it's sort of saying like, yeah, we do have these predestined periods that we're going to go through. So we can look at your chart and we can say, you know, for example, if, you know, Astro.com said you're going to go to jail next year, I'm guessing you've got a lot of Saturn going on. And Saturn is the archetype of prison. Saturn doesn't make us feel good. Saturn makes us feel restricted, makes us feel limited, takes things away from us. So as an astrologer, we look at these transits, and either for myself or my clients, I see, oh, you look at the year ahead and you've got crap loads of Saturn. And that is sort of like, not a literal we're going to prison, but a we're going to be working with Saturn. Okay, so that's the first most important rectifying, I think, is that we can't totally predict the future. You know you are going to be dealing with prison-like energies. You don't know you're going to get sent to prison.
Forms of being prison. I definitely consider that.
Yeah. So, you know, it's like when it comes to the determined qualities, for example, you might look at somebody's transits and say, oh, next year you're going to have Saturn transiting your 10th house, opposing your moon in Taurus and square to your Saturn in Gemini. I mean, this is going to make you feel really insecure. And so the way, you know, we want to rephrase this, whether you're the astrologer showing or, you know, this is the most important thing because Astro.com obviously can put it out there in a way that can be disconcerting. So it's actually our job as the person researching astrology. We have to learn how to sort of sift through it and throw away the parts that are going to make us feel disconcerted and paranoid, because that isn't helping us then. If we're learning about our future transits and feeling afraid and I don't want to live because this is going to happen to me down the line, I mean, think about how much of a handicap and a hindrance this is. This isn't helpful. So the way we rephrase that is we say, oh, next year we're going into a bunch of Saturn, which actually is leading into the evolutionary function of what's going on. Instead of saying this is what is going to happen to you, let's talk about why. And the why would be to plunge into insecurities in order to release them, to face some of your greatest fears in order to mature through them. This is how Saturn actually functions. Saturn teaches us by putting limitation on us, by taking things away, because Saturn is actually a teacher. Saturn, just like Pluto, just like all of these forces that oftentimes get seen as bad. And Saturn used to get called Satan. Saturn was seen as pretty damn bad. These are actually beneficial forces. These are our benefactors. Saturn gets called the devil because Saturn's actually the devil's advocate. Saturn is the voice of doubt because the voice of doubt actually teaches us faith. So by facing insecurities, you remove them. By plunging into your fears, you become fearless. By facing limitations, you learn how to move through them. This is how life works. And so, when you're going to go to jail next year, it's going to be much more so of an evolutionary learning, which means that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And it's certainly not a punishment. It's certainly not karmic. This has to happen to you, and it's certainly not determined. What you do up until next year is going to change everything, which is going to determine how Saturn affects us. And so another way of looking at this is, things usually don't get really forcefully thrust upon us unless it's required. And so when people run away and run away and run away from what life or Saturn is trying to teach them, that's when Saturn tends to come around and kick us in the ass. That's when we get the prison sentence. If we learn to integrate and work with Saturn and mature and not run away from things in life, then we don't get as many of the jail sentences. See, it's actually very remarkable the way it works. That's proving how evolution is, which is everything in life is for our own evolution. Therefore, one way or the other, the hard way or the easy way, we're going to learn. And because it's all learning, it's coming out of love. It's not bad. It's not punishment.
Yeah. So, in light of Saturn being the devil's advocate and Pluto being the transformer, the initiator, what does Earth represent as a planet?
That's a good question, because I feel like Earth's kind of the show. I sort of feel like Earths are where all the planets and where all the stars are kind of congregating, at least here at this particular perspective. So Earth seems to be a particular story depicting these universal energies, I guess, if that makes sense. I'm not really sure. But Earth as a whole is like the meeting ground, and therefore kind of the in-between, the middle. It's not heaven and it's not hell. It's where heaven and hell come to meet. And I really don't like the religious conceptual understanding of heaven and hell. I just simply mean, we have pleasurable things here and we have things that are painful. And that's because we're on this planet where everything happens. I mean, we kind of get a full spectrum. And I think that that's extremely advantageous. I see Earth as really being a vehicle of heart awakening. Because Earth is where we get to, it's like there's these concepts of heavenly planets where everything is so blissful you can't even get anything done. And then there are these uncomfortably painful types of environments that are so harsh you can't get anything done. And so it's like here where we see the full spectrum, it allows our hearts to wake up. When we see other people suffering in the third world countries, it is painful, it is suffering, and it makes our heart wake up. It makes us active, it makes us want to start doing something. Let's help those people. Let's not try to just, harbor ourselves off in our own comfort zone and make our own heaven. See, that's even like the old religious concept is, let's join the religion to, guarantee that we're going to be saved, or let's go meditate in the temple so we can reach nirvana. And here on earth, we get the advantage of moving on to a whole new level of opening our hearts and accessing unconditional love. Because instead of just saving our asses, we get the opportunity to become actively involved with helping other people, getting this full spectrum experience. So this is a planet and a vehicle for awakening compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I see Earth is, and the Mother is compassion.
Well, I guess it is then Schoolhouse Earth. This is what I've heard before.
Yeah.
And everything you just said.
Yes, and there seems to be different courses and levels to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. That was really well. But, what does salt of the earth mean to you?
Salt of the earth. That's a good question coming right after the earth, isn't it? Because the earth is this vehicle of opening our heart and stepping into compassion. So, you could say it's the schoolhouse. I've heard the phrase angel training and all these things. So this is kind of where we are learning to, step into our greater identity. And so it seems to me that salt of the earth really means we are the essence of the earth. We get born out of the earth, and if you believe in reincarnation, maybe you get born a slug and then we get turned into a plant, and there is these innumerable upward spirals. And that's why I named my little business Rasalila Healing, because I see it, everything is these upward spirals. It's really just dancing. It's all music. It's all symphony. And so of course we're not all on the same level. Of course we're not all playing the same instrument. We're playing different instruments at different levels to create this incredibly beautiful symphony. And so this is what we are. We are this symphony. We are this music. We are this dance. We are this love. We are this life. There is nothing else but that. And so that is also what I see us being, the salt of the earth. It's like we're the essence of the earth. We're the cream of the crop. What comes out of it all and what continues to go around is just more and more of that love, that beauty, that dance.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. And wrapping up, how would you like to be remembered?
I guess
After
just...
story's all said and done.
Yeah, I guess just contributing and being more of that. Yeah, it's like let's be a part of the dance, reminding itself that we are dancing. Let's be a part of a movement that actually brings love consciousness into this planet, rather than more mundane conceptual concepts. So, I guess it's just we're kind of, I feel, all doing this together, and I guess I want to be remembered not the way the old patriarchs were, giving a bunch of information that was partial information. I hope that the information I give respects people's nature and life enough where it's not misleading people more than we've already been misled. I guess that would be really what I hope to achieve.
To be understood.
Yeah, to be understood, and not be more of the blind leading the blind would be nice. Yeah.
Oh.
Oh.
Well, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. I could have fill up with 3 more hours worth of questions right now, but I value you so much. It's an honor to chat with you, and that I get to be your first interviewer.
Yeah, thank you, Veruschka. It's really been special.
And keep on keeping on. I love that you're making that commitment. I think you've got a fan base waiting for you every week. So I hope that's not too much pressure. People are eagerly awaiting your report.
Just have to not be too Leo, as you know.
All right. Well, you have a beautiful rest of the year, and look forward to seeing you online next week.
Thanks,
Anything
Veruschka.
you'd like to say?
No, I mean, it's been a real pleasure. I mean, thank you so much for the opportunity. Like you said, this is all new for me as well, so this is really exciting, and I would love to continue to talk more and more about this stuff as well, because it's just as much as a pleasure for me. And it's been such a pleasure and honor speaking with you, so thanks for the opportunity.
All right. Aloha.
Aloha, take care.